Huh, okay. I guess that's not working. Oh, there we go. Apparently our video that we're normally would play is not working today. I didn't test that. And now I need to mute myself because there we go. Cool. Hey, so that's a weird start, but that's all right. We can get started anyway. Even without that, I can check this the old-fashioned way before I had a video that I could automate this to check levels. Um, okay, I think that works. Good, good, good. Um, hey there. Welcome to History Chats this week. Yeah, we're talking about maps. It's March Madness, of course, and so we have taken it upon ourselves to talk about the different stories of different maps and things like that. You might be familiar with the basic concept of this if you've been watching. If you're not, if you haven't been, welcome. We talk about maps in March, and this is an interesting one. Yeah, let's just jump into it. So this is the story of the Hathaway survey in 1839. And this is really, it's not just the map itself, it's the mapping of it, which we'll get into that in just a second here. So this is the map. Originally, I knew when we were choosing kind of maps and stories we wanted to talk about this month that we had a slide. Well, one of these. Actually, we have this is one of the trays in our storage for maps. Fun storage there. There's maybe 3 or 4 copies of this map that I came across when I was looking for something else, and I thought, ooh, that's very cool. Hathaway map survey was one of those really important moments. Let's take a look at it. This, to be clear, is not the actual Hathaway survey that was done. We'll talk about the survey itself, but that survey and the maps and field notes that Joshua Hathaway put together during his time doing it end up in the Library of Congress. But as you can see, well, let's talk about the map itself. So this is a slide taken of a document that was created for this guy, Malcolm Rochold. Just a fun three image there of him. If you're not familiar with Malcolm Rochold, if you're in the central Wisconsin area, you probably haven't been digging that hard because he's one of the more prolific and really good historians, and really took it upon himself to say, you know, the story of central Wisconsin, the Wisconsin River Valley hasn't been documented, and he took it upon himself to try and do that. And so that he wrote a number of books and works about the area, including one relevantly here, Pioneers of the Pinery, copy here, which is a great book. And chapter 2 is all about the Hathaway survey. And he was able to pull from a friend and fellow area historian Anthony Kidrowski. Sorry, I'm probably butchering that name. At the time, he was the Portage County supervisor or surveyor, the surveyor for Portage County, and he kind of took it upon himself to go in person to the archives and look at letters and really kind of uncovered this story. So the two of them kind of collaborated on this chapter, kind of pulled together their research and their understanding. Rachel wrote the chapter, and they wanted a graphic to show, and so they turned to another Portage County guy, Ray Specht, who was the professor at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point at the time, in the geography and geology department. And one of his students, W.A. Vacon, or William Vacon. Sorry, I don't know how to specifically pronounce it. Vacon. I'm defaulting to a French. Anyway, this picture is from about 10 years later. In 1988, he was running for the supervisor. an alderman position in Wausau. He moves to Wausau afterwards, and I think still of these gentlemen, I think he's the only one who's still around, as far as I know. He lives in Green Bay. But anyway, he used his skills to create the map. And this is the map, not in the sort of grainy scanned slide that I from here, but instead the actual map that appears in the book. It's a very interesting map. I hope that's not too complicated. Basically, we'll kind of skip over the reason for its existence, but it's interesting in and of itself. This is a map created based off of the information that Hathaway did back in 1839 so that we can use it for modern purposes. I don't actually have access to, I didn't go to Washington to the Library of Congress myself to look at the original, so I'm going to base a lot of my, what's going to come in the next rest of the story based off of Rasholt and the resources that his collaborators in this put together. So this is the map. This is essentially the travel that Hathaway took. It represents basically the first survey of what's going to become, eventually, Wood County in yellow here. In orange, it's Portage County, and in blue, it is Marathon County. That's where the borders are today. And you can see that these sort of square lines, if you're not familiar with township range numbers, that's what those are. Basically, there's 6 by 6 mile squares that are laid out all over Wisconsin, and that's how you identify a bit of land. When you survey, this is the method that they used. So we know that, like, going from the baseline with the border with Illinois, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the way up here into the 20s, and that's what we're talking about. And then we're going east to 5, 6, 7, and 8. Just kind of interesting to see that too. But let's talk about the survey itself. So Joshua Hathaway is the Hathaway in the Hathaway survey. He is an interesting fellow. This is him later in life, around 1860, I think, as a portrait. When he comes to this, he has some credentials. He has moved from New York to Chicago in 1832, and he's going to spend a lot of time in the Midwest in the 30s and 40s doing a lot of surveys, and a very integral sort of formative point in time here. He comes to from Chicago to Green Bay in 1833, and he becomes kind of associated with A.G. Ellis, who's the Surveyor General of the Wisconsin-Iowa Territory, which is what it was at that time. And then he ends up going to Green Bay, and he does a lot of work. If you actually look at, for example, the collection down in Madison, the Joshua Hathaway papers, it's pretty extensive. And if you go through here, they don't actually talk about the 3 Mile survey or the Hathaway survey up the Wisconsin River as much, because he is just so ubiquitous. He's one of those guys who just does a lot of work during this time. And including, interestingly, surveying townships 1, 2, and 3 on the southeast corner of Wisconsin. He is contracted to do a survey following the Treaty of the Cedars, which is kind of one of these formative things. I'll actually bring up here this is the Menominee Indian tribe of Wisconsin. So the Menominee Nation, their group online, which is great, and they have this basically what becomes the Cedar, what the United States Americans call the Cedar Treaty, or the Treaty of the Cedars, signed at Cedar Point on the Fox River near Green Bay. And so it lays out basically the terms. There's articles here. This is basically what the Menominee are giving to the United States, and then kind of going from there, the different laying out who does what and in response to what. But it's this second kind of clause within the first article that's relevant to, because I'll show a map of where everything is in a second, but this is the actual text. And the interesting thing here is this. So basically, the land that gets seceded from the Menominee to the United States is said 3 miles in width on each side of the river, Wisconsin River. The tract containing 8 townships, or 184,320 acres of land. So essentially, we're going from the, going up. That's the amount of land. It kind of roughly, we'll see roughly where it ends up being in modern times. But this covers, again, what we looked at back here, right? Okay. So the Treaty of the Cedars, if we map it out, this is a map that they produced in the 70s for the Wisconsin Blue Books, kind of talking about Native American treaties. It's not perfect in a lot of ways. It's some outdated terminology like the Winnebago, which should be the Ho-Chunk today, that's what we would refer to them. But still, this is kind of roughly the treaties. This doesn't necessarily represent where they lived, but rather the agreements with the government of the United States to take the land, essentially. And in 1836, as I said, there's kind of the two clauses. The bulk of this deals with the stuff over near Green Bay and then up along the Lake Michigan. But there is this interesting little tract of land going from Point Boss, I guess. We'll talk about specifically where it starts, but going up the Wisconsin River roughly to where Wausau is. The 3 miles basically is because they really just wanted the pine here, the great white pine, the pinery. You could float it down the river. That was great. But you're not going to drag logs more than 3 miles. And so they just took 3 miles on each side. This is really an attempt to try and get the rights from the Menominee to log here. Now, you might notice also before I move on that this kind of juts into what is otherwise seemingly Chippewa territory. And the Ojibwe did kind of have, the Ojibwe, the Chippewa are sort of the local groups of the Ojibwe people, much larger. They did kind of control this area. It's unclear whether in 1837, I didn't look specifically at the language to identify specifically how they identified this, whether that agreement also included the land that the Menominee had seceded to the United States, or whether the American agents had basically decided, well, we already have this land, so we're not paying you for it. But that's kind of the nature of Native American treaties with the United States. Yeah, then they're not, they're problematic and difficult to decipher. But roughly, this is the basis for now. There's a couple things that I'll just briefly cover here. Back in the early 1830s, there had been the Black Hawk War, which is a bloody conflict that really nobody comes out on top looking good. But the United States does win over largely the group of the Sioux, including the Ho-Chunk and the Potawatomi, I think. It was the other group. Basically, that had started because some overzealous American frontier people decided to go into land that there was no agreements for or anything, and then they were, raided by the natives, and then the United States stepped in, and there's a whole deal. In the aftermath in the 1830s, there was a really big kind of focus on, well, we want to make sure that we can at least have claim to the land that we've signed with, did all of the Menominee people who were relevant to this area agree to this treaty? No, probably not. But at least on paper, the United States can say, well, we already bargained and we're paying for this land. And that also makes it easier for, financing, because if you're looking to go up into the Wisconsin River Valley and do logging, you might need financing, and they probably don't want to see that, lead to conflict with the Native Americans. So at least in theory, this is kind of where this is all happening. But once this has happened, right, in 1836 into 1837, this Wisconsin River Valley is now open for potential use. But you can't just show up and start logging. We need to have the government go through and survey the area so we know what you're buying, and you can get the rights. And that's where Joshua Hathaway comes in. Now, again, there's this bit here at the beginning of okay, it's 40, what does it say? 3 miles on each side, 8 townships. Okay, that's a certain number of 8 times 6 miles, so whatever that is. However, where do we start is a good question. And it lays it out pretty clearly here, beginning at a point upon the said Wisconsin River, 2 miles above the grant or privilege heretofore granted by the Menominee Nation and the United States to Amable Greenough, or Greenough. So who's that? Amable Greenough. I'm probably going to default to the French pronunciation, Greenough. but it's not Grignon. This is very much he is mixed race. He has some background in I think the Ho Chunk, but I could be wrong. I'm not sure specifically his background, but certainly his family comes from being partially one leg in the native world and also sort of that French Canadian explorer, fur trader. He was a fur trader. He maintained a trading post on the Wisconsin River, much further south. Yeah, also just as a quick note, interestingly enough, he is the grandson of let's see, Charles Michael de Langlade, who's often considered kind of one of the first settlers here, the first sort of pioneers into Wisconsin, and for whom Langlade County is named. So he's got some background here. He's actually more relevant in here if you're familiar with like John Dubé, kind of similar here, sort of in the Native American world, working collecting furs at a trading post on the Wisconsin River. Dubé isn't going to feature as much in this story specifically because, well, it's complicated, but basically same kind of idea, except he is actually in Marathon County or eventually comes up here. It's a little unclear, but kind of the similar vibe here. Trading with the Native Americans and the early folks passing through, often for furs. Another such figure is Daniel Whitney. Now, Whitney is an interesting guy. Like Dubé gets his start with the American Fur Company, and he operates a. Actually, let me bring up a map. Let's do Google Maps. Let me kind of down here. Oh, even further. So it's kind of where the Yellow River empties into the Wisconsin River, so kind of near Necedah. So he's operating down there. He decides at some point in the late 20s, I'm just going to go, out that way. I'm going to keep going up the Wisconsin River, see what's up there. He comes across a stand of pines at Pinery, and he decides, ooh, that could be helpful. And so he goes to Green Bay, and in 1831, he negotiates a permit with the Menominee to log that stand of white pine on the Wisconsin River. And he ends up building a mill and operates it for a number of years. Now, it's a little unclear. He initially didn't get the United States involved in this, but he realizes, like, hey, I probably should tell the United States, and so he informs the government, and it's not like an official thing that you could, go to the records of the United States and, like, find this treaty specifically, because it's a kind of a private citizen with the Menominee. But this is kind of the first, apparently, thing. Now, this connects because Whitney is actually good friends and certainly colleagues in many ways with Greenough. And Amable Greenough sees this and goes, ooh, I could do that too. And so he goes to Green Bay around the same time, a little after, and actually negotiates a treaty, thus the treaty that's in the Treaty of the Cedars. Same thing. Basically, he gets approval from the Menominee to do some logging. He's going to put up a mill. It's going to do sort of part like a sawmill and also flour mill, a grist mill. And basically the idea is he's going to be there on the Wisconsin River, and he will be available to do all of the milling that the Menominee and the United States government need. He also gets the government involved in this, although there is some miscommunication about some aspects of this we'll get into in a second. But ultimately, this is, legit then, right? Because the government of the United States and the Menominee are signing off on this, and he goes. Now, of course, this area hasn't been surveyed, so they apparently end up getting John Voorhees Sudam, who's contracted to do the survey for them, about 1832, which is interesting because just to give you kind of an idea of how close-knit the community here is in early Wisconsin, the other big accolade or reason that we know Sudam is he ends up founding a newspaper in Green Bay, the first paper in in Wisconsin, and he does this alongside Robert Ellis, and A.G. Ellis is the guy that is the Surveyor General of the territory, and he's the one that's going to approve and basically appoint Hathaway to do the survey of the land later. Now, it's a little unclear exactly how he manages to do this, and this brings us to the next point. He gets Hathaway gets the contract in 1839 in February. He In May they set out on the survey. Right. He probably took a crew of. It's a little unclear. The records don't say how many people he hired, but Rosscholtz suggests that there's probably at least 2 chainmen, 1 axeman, probably a flagman, a cook, and possibly a packer to kind of keep tabs on everything. Although it's possible that the cook did that as well. Now, what exactly they do, let's not necessarily get into it, but they have from May until September 1st, they had a bond for $4,500 that would be forfeit if he didn't finish by September 1st. Apparently, quote, acts of God accepted. And ultimately, he's not going to meet that, and I don't know what the situation is, but what's relevant here is he's got to get started. So he comes up the river, and now we have to figure out where to start, right? The original contract with the Treaty of the Cedars says 2 miles north of Greenough, right? Well, where is Greenough? Because to be clear, like going back here, Ellis is unclear about this. He asks the federal government, hey, I don't have a copy of this treaty or a survey or anything. Can you like clarify where this is supposed to start? Because Greenough is claiming something, and that's not necessarily what we're seeing. And apparently the situation had arisen where, because of the multiple different people involved, Greenough apparently claimed that he was going to be setting up a mill about 180 miles north of Fort Winnebago, which is it's not Plover, Portage, Wisconsin. But that's not what happens because that would put him near Rhinelander. So it's a little unclear. Ultimately, they decide to go just basically this is where his trading post was. We're going to go 2 miles north of that. Greenough was really unhappy about this. He claimed that there's this site up here. Here, let me give a laser pointer up here. That was supposed to be where it is. But according to Rosscholtz, there's no evidence that he ever actually built or was actually going to build a mill. So they did find Whitney's Mill as they went up the Wisconsin River. Whitney's Mill by this point in 1839 was defunct. They had basically abandoned it. But the remains were there, but there was no sign of Greenough's Mill. Now, ultimately, that's just kind of where they started, and it ends up working out. So from that point on, they go up. What do they see? Well, oh, there you go. Yeah. So going up, past Greenough and Whitney's, it's interestingly because around Grand Rapids here, this is where Wisconsin Rapids, which is originally named Grand Rapids, there's a little bit of development here. I guess somewhere around this circle, I'm a little unclear about where that would be specifically. There was an operation by Bloomer, so the Bloomer Mill, and you can see here iron ore, 2 mills. There's a bush dam and guard lock, so there's some development happening here. And he is not going to be the only one, even though Whitney and Greenough apparently were the only ones to officially get approval from the Menominee with like a contract. Other people are already here and are starting to log. There's Brawley's Mill up here on the Teeth River. Going along closer to what is now Stevens Point, Avon Richardson had a little operation, and Conant and Campbell had a good mill up and running here too. So, as they go, he recognizes this and he makes notes as they go. A little bit north of here, along a river out, there was where Dubé had his trading post. It's not on this map specifically, and apparently Dubé himself wasn't there, although, or at least in his field notes, Hathaway doesn't actually mention Dubé specifically, but clearly either Dubé or one of his family members was there, and he actually sent a letter perhaps from them, or received a letter. There's some stuff here. I'm not going to get into that level of granularity. So there's some stuff happening, right? Probably the first real sort of operation designed for logging specifically, though, would have been up at the Big Bull Falls. We'll talk about that in a second. There's 2 Bull Fallses, of course, of note. So I don't know if the plural of Bull Falls, if it's big and little, is the Bulls Falls, like Attorneys General, which I Sure, let's call it that. The Bulls Falls. So Little Bull Falls, which becomes Mosinee, is noted right here. And then Big Bull Falls up here. There's some other interesting things. He apparently explicitly noted Rib River, which I think is interesting because over the next 20 years, there's going to be back and forth on like, is it called Rib River or is it going to be Plakota River? And so the maps are unclear about that, but he says apparently Rib River. He also mentions the Eau Claire, which is labeled here, AU instead of EAU, so it's slightly different spelling, as well as the Eau Plaine. Again, AUX Plains, as well as some other stuff there too. So, but yeah, there's nobody at Little Bull Falls, but there is George. Oh, I don't know why I put that on here. If I'm being honest, I'm not sure why I highlighted this, but this is the area here oh, that's why. Interestingly, if you actually take the amount of mileage that he was supposed to have done, if you start where he started, it actually ends just before Big Bull Falls. So it's a little unclear. I don't know if these lines have been added by, were explicitly in the original surveys. I kind of doubt it. I think this is probably something added by back in 1979 when they built them, or 78, 79, whenever he designed the map to make it easier to see where we are. That's kind of interesting. So I don't know if actually George Stevens would have actually fit in the specific area, but he mapped it anyway. George Stevens, of course, if you're not familiar, kind of the father of both the namesake for Stevens Point. He drops off some supplies at a little point on the river that becomes Stevens Point. He had come up in 1838. He is from New York and had been down in St. Louis when he had heard about the promise of the great pinery of central Wisconsin. Another guy in the area named Robert Wakefield apparently took him up and showed him himself in 1838. He goes back down to St. Louis, gets some financing, and comes back with a crew and builds the first dam and the first facility, the first logging or actually settlement really in Marathon County, what's going to become Marathon County, and that site is going to become Wausau. They noted the dam, and this is from 1839 as well. This is a sketch that he had put on the back of or included in some letters that he sent back to his financiers. So this kind of illustrates the situation here. So you can see the river. They're putting the dam in there. There's got some guard locks stuff being built. There's the 3 islands, maybe 4. It's also unclear. Again, I'm going from the wording that Rasholt puts in his book based off of the research of Kredowski. Nope, that's not how Anthony. And then that is based off of the interpretation of the original things. So I don't know if this is the actual order, but he lists a bunch of the river names as Willow Island, Maple Island, and Meadow Stack Island, none of which are actually these, like Clark Island, Plummer Island, and what we call Barker Stewart, but was McIndoe for a long time. So a little unclear exactly which refer to which, but interesting to just see that alternate, names there. So, okay. I will say also, it's a little underwhelming. If it feels a little underwhelming about Marathon County, that's partially because his actual notes, his field notes, were never, don't appear to in the archives. Apparently they got lost or maybe were never submitted completely. He did submit the stuff eventually by November or December of 1839, so he was only about a month or 2 off from the deadline. But yeah, he ends up submitting it. Apparently the Marathon County stuff for these last few townships got lost, so we don't actually know the specifics of was Dubé there and things like that. But ultimately, it's still kind of an important thing. And arguably, this is more important to understand what's happening down in the, what is now Wood and Portage counties. But it's also the basis. This is the first survey of what's going to become Marathon County. And as Stevens leaves and others come to the area, Moore and Clark and Desert down in Stevens Point, or in Mosinee, there's going to be building on this. This is the map of Wisconsin from 1850. This is the year that Marathon County gets split off here. You can see this dotted line from Portage County. And you can see that there's this familiar looking grid system, and this is not connected, right? This is basically using Hathaway's map. Copperthwaite and company basically used it. And you can see a lot of these points. Comments and Constance Mill is here. I don't know where Warsaw comes from. I wonder if that's just a misunderstanding of, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. Plover is here now, but also Bloomer's Mill, Greenough, Whitney's. So a lot of this is very clearly influenced by the survey that was done in 1839. And what's really interesting, again, I don't know if this has been corrected or not, needed to be, but if you look at the actual range and town, grids that make up the townships or the towns of Wisconsin, townships, I guess, of Wisconsin, they're not always towns, they actually kind of line up. So even though, we're not going, in theory, what you do is you go from the baseline all the way at the border with Illinois, and every 6 miles you make a parallel line, and that becomes the next township. They didn't go, though, from that line all the way to the top. He kind of started in the middle here. And that becomes a lot of the basis. You can see how that kind of influences the geography of the counties that are going to be created out of this. And it's pretty close. And so that is the other legacy here. Outside of being a very cool story that shows us a little bit about the time period, there is some real implications of the surveyors that would come and build upon the work as time went on. Okay, well, that was a lot. Hopefully that made sense, and you learned a little bit. I certainly did. I didn't expect when I thought, oh, there's that, that slide, and there'd be something interesting there. I didn't realize there was going to be quite so complicated of a background on the map itself, but very cool to see. And I highly recommend, by the way, if you're interested in sort of the early history of the region, a lot of Rauscholt's stuff has been great, but Pioneers of the Pinery is pretty cool too. Not just for this, for all the other stuff there in that early history. Yeah, so there you go. Excuse me. That's the last of the map stories from March MAPness. We'll probably do something for March MAPness next year, but in the meantime, next week will be in April, and that means a new theme. And we're going to return to an old standby, an old favorite of people you should know. And specifically, we're going to be talking, Gary will be joining us to talk about, local librarian and advocate for preservation, Mary Ann Norton. So that'll be a fun program. And we have some more fun biographies and stories over the course of the month. So hopefully you stick around for all of that. I'm gonna check to see if there's any messages that I've been ignoring or anything, but that's probably about it. Let's see, that's not updating. Oh, there we go. Cool. All right. Well, I don't see any questions or comments. If you have them, I'll try to circle back and address them if I can. But yeah, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon or whenever it is when you're watching this. Like I said, we'll be back next week with some more people you should know and some more history. And hope you see you there. In the meantime, have a wonderful week, and yeah,